Hi everybody, it's Thursday, Litsoc, and we're very, very privileged this afternoon to have Mr. Dan Stone with us, who is going to take us through the long and winding road and the road goes ever on and on, of JRR Tolkien, which mostly on Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit.
Hobbit, Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, Hobbit of Lord of the Rings. It's a very long time since not that we've talked about it, but we've had a complete session on it. Sadly, we don't have eggs and bacon or second breakfast with us, but we do have chocolate biscuits, which I don't think hobbits ate, but I'm sure they would have loved them.
They would have.
So, absolutely. So, let's hand over to Mr. Stone. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I did bring quite a few books with me, just to sort of show the expanse of the Tolkien book series that is the Middle-earth. This isn't actually all of them. There's another, 12 volumes I think I don't have here, maybe 13. So if you're really, really into Tolkien, maybe you can have a look at all of them. But we're only really sort of talking about the first four, his original The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Technically the only 4 books he actually ever published. The rest were all published by his grandson, actually, made up of cuttings of stories that he wrote and sort of all put together. But yes, so as I have explained to Mr. Humphreys before, I am what can only be described as a Tolkien nerd. So I thought we would just do sort of a little bit of a couple of facts about The Lord of the Rings, sort of how it came to pass, and then I've got sort of a couple of discussion points that we can talk about that I think are quite interesting for those books. But my first question to all of you, and I know the answer for some of you, but have you ever read The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings?
Yes.
I want to read it.
You want
but
to? Okay, well I like that you want to. And you haven't read either?
No,
have you read
I
all
would
4?
like to. I've heard of them before. My dad read them, I think.
Okay.
He knows a bit about it.
Yeah. And have you read them?
Yeah.
Okay, good. How did you find them? Did you like
It
them?
was a really long time ago, but I remember being really absorbed.
Okay, good. That's what I'd like to hear. have the two of you at least seen the movies?
Yes. I've seen The Hobbit, not
Not Lord of the Rings.
Oh, okay. Have you seen all 3 of the Hobbits?
Yes.
Okay. But you haven't seen the movies at all?
No.
Oh, wow. Well, you are brand new to this, so strap in. But I'll give just a very quick synopsis of the books then for you, if you haven't read them or seen the movies. So they're both somewhat similar, I guess, in their narrative. So The Hobbit is a story mostly about Bilbo Baggins, who is sort of the main character of the book, and about him being taken on a journey with a group of dwarfs. Unexpected journey, yes. And Gandalf the Wizard to reclaim the Misty Mountains, which was the home of the dwarves. And along the way there's trolls and goblins and dragons and you name it. So it's a journey about Smaug the dragon, and his sort of journey in finding his adventurous self. And then The Lord of the Rings, which follows that, which still has Bilbo Baggins in it, but his nephew Frodo also goes on an unexpected journey, though one he volunteers for, rather than it being thrust upon him, of destroying the One Ring and the travelling to Mount Doom. And there's lots of stuff in between, but they are sort of very similar in that it is a sort of fantasy epic journey of travelling from one place to another to achieve something, which I think is a pretty common sort of theme in books anyway. But yes, so one that you might find interesting, actually, I don't know if you know this, but Tolkien and sort of how these books came to pass, he was actually a linguistic genius, I think is the only way you can describe it. And he learnt something around like 18 or 20 languages in his lifetime, which, I can barely speak 2, let alone 15 or 20. And some of those, I think we talked about the other day, it was sort of Old Norse, medieval Welsh, Old English, French, Spanish, German, Russian, and he just sort of created languages as a bit of a fun thing to do. I don't know how you find that fun, creating languages, but he did. And he wrote some Elven languages and decided that he wanted to write a history for those languages. And that's when he started writing what he then called the Legendarium, which was actually the Silmarillion just there. And then eventually he decided it was so good that he wanted to write it into an actual story, which is where The Hobbit came about, which was a children's story published in 1937, something around there, just before World War II. So it is, it's an old book, so I don't blame you for having not read them. They are a little bit older, but still very, very good. He actually wrote The Lord of the Rings as well as one book that was supposed to be a 1,200-page epic, and the publishers in the 50s decided that no one was going to read 1,200 pages, and there wasn't enough paper to print it. So he was... Well, of course, yeah. So they decided it had to be split into 3 books, which is why we have the 3 books. And it was, I think, either the first or one of the first trilogies, as we know them now.
Yeah, what's interesting, I think, is that the way that it's structured, and it must be down to the editors as well, is that, you've got the different volumes, and the way that the timeline works within the Rings is just extraordinary in terms of its planning, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, each of the books are split into 2 parts, so it's supposed to be a sort of a 6-part one epic novel. And as you say, the timeline, it doesn't jump around so much, but there is sort of a distinctive, there are 6 different timelines in it, which is...
when they break, when the Fellowship breaks and you're following different stories, you don't really feel that you're neglecting anybody, because you know that they're going on, but the way that he balances it and keeps it going, I think is really, really clever in terms of structure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and lots of different, as we mentioned, lots of different pathways. So they are originally travelling as one group of 9, and then they split out into, how many groups eventually? I think 4 or 5 at some point.
It's 3 initially, isn't it?
It's 3 initially, and then Merry and Pippin go off, carted off.
Yeah, they're kind of abducted.
Yeah, they don't go voluntarily, let's say. And then they all sort of move around and different characters come in and come out. But it sort of follows... the main 2 characters really are Frodo and Sam. And that's the 2 hobbits that they sort of follow in the most, although, and I'll come on to, I have a little discussion point for you in a little bit, but the narrator of the book, although is written in third person, it is supposed to have been written by several characters in the book. So, but we'll come on to that in a little bit. But the first thing I wanted to sort of mention really was the genre. So obviously, it's a fantasy series. For me, and I don't know if you'll agree, I actually think it squarely falls into the war category for me. And I'm not always very popular with this opinion, but it's one that I hold dear.
It is, in some ways, isn't it? It is a book about people working under pressure and war. It's in in Christopher Booker's book. Do you remember the
7 Basic Plots?
Basic Plots. Remember we had a Litsoc on that a long time ago. No, you probably don't. It comes very firmly under Quest.
Yeah, and
and the Buildings Roman as well, the rite of passage.
Yeah, and I mean, 2 of my favourite quotes, which I have written down, and I'll read for you in a moment, come from my favourite character of the book, Samwise Gamgee. Is everyone in agreement that he is the best character?
He is I think I said to you, he's the real hero.
I know, I'm arrogant for me, sorry.
Oh, okay, Strider. Yeah. Do you remember many of the characters? Do you think you have a favourite?
I more remember moments. I don't really remember.
Okay, all right. But, Samwise for me is my favourite character, and as Mr. Humphreys has described him, as the real hero. But he has 2 of my favourite quotes, and for me they are very war based. Because if you don't know, Tolkien actually fought in World War One, and he actually survived the Battle of Somme. Which, if you haven't heard of it, the Battle of Somme was the most deadly battle of World War One. I think it was something like 20,000 British soldiers died in the first day.
Yeah, worst day still for the British Army.
Yeah, and he was a part of that. So a lot of the imagery, I think, that you sort of, I say, see or read in the books, I think, comes from a lot of his experiences there. And also, I think, just the struggles that people felt at the time, especially during World War II as well, which he was almost recruited as a code breaker for, interestingly, because of his linguistic background. But my two favourite quotes from the Lord of the Rings books, both of which I think come from The Two Towers, if I remember correctly, both from Samwise Gamgee. But in the end, it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come, and when the sun shines, it will shine out the clearer. Which was quite a common feeling, I think, during World War II of sort of, nothing was really on the shores of Britain until a little bit later on in the war. But, it was it was something that was sort of removed and we sort of felt the impact of. And my second favourite, actually it might be my favourite quote, I think. It's like the great stories, Mr. Frodo, the ones that really mattered, full of darkness and danger they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end, because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad happened? And they are two slightly depressing quotes, I think. But they are my two favourite quotes. I think it captures his life, I think, and sort of what he experienced. And so there's a lot of sort of that war feeling, and actually the theme of war and this sort of one great evil. So even if you've only seen The Hobbit, you'll know there's this sort of one great evil that was trying to inflict evil and hate across the world, and that is very World War II, very World War One. I think a lot of it draws from that. And so one of my first questions I have for you, which might be a little bit of a deep question, but we'll see. Do you know what the One Ring is? Have you heard of the One Ring from Lord of the Rings? So I'll use my ring. I wish it was the One Ring, but not quite.
Could you imagine what you could do with this
mine
ring?
is just a very normal ring. But the One Ring was a ring forged in a volcano, and it was supposed to be sort of all the evil in the world poured into it, and sort of this one powerful ring. If you had the One Ring, do you think you could resist its power? Is I think my favourite question about the Lord of the Rings. So if you've read it, do you think you could resist the power of the One Ring?
I can't even resist a biscuit.
That is actually a really good answer, though, because I think most people say, oh yes, I would be Samwise or I would be Frodo. And I think the real answer is I don't think you would be. I don't think anyone really could resist it. But I think there's a lot of sort of comparison between what in essence was Nazi Germany and sort of the One Ring, and I think he took a lot of thought from that in terms of how it went through. But I mean, you've studied it properly, so do you think you could resist the One Ring?
Well, it would be nice to think that one would be Galadriel, and because you start doing good things, but yeah, I mean, if I think of the One Ring as nuclear weapons, no. I would have to say no.
No.
I mean, I would have to say that I just hate that sort of weapon so much. I would just.
But there is a little bit of symbolism in it, I think, of just having too much power sometimes can be a bad thing.
Yeah.
So a little bit of power is always good. Well, it can be good. It depends on the person. But too much power, it kind of leans one way. And it's nice that you mentioned Galadriel, because she is the sort of, well, especially in the movies, if you've seen those, she is sort of the shining light, as it were. There's always, every little good deed can go somewhat towards breaking up the bad deeds. So yeah. But I said we'd come back to it, and it's talking about the narrator and sort of a question for you a little bit on, can we always trust the narrator? So I mentioned to you that it's written in third person, but the whole story of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings is supposed to be a book called There and Back Again, which is written by Bilbo Baggins, Frodo Baggins, and then later on, a little bit towards the end, Samwise Gamgee. Arguably the three best characters, I think, of all of them, for me personally. But given how the story changed in The Hobbit, do you know the story behind that? Do you know how The Hobbit changed? No. So when The Hobbit was originally released, and you'll recognise some of this from the movies as well. When The Hobbit was originally released, Bilbo Baggins found Gollum in the cave, and they had a riddle competition, and they were winning. Well, they're winning his life in the movie, but in the original version of the book, Gollum freely gives him the One Ring. and he gives it over it's because he won the game of riddles. That was later changed, so the later versions of The Hobbit changed in that Bilbo, I mean, he essentially steals it, right? I think is the thing for that, and so and the reasoning he gave behind that, because Bilbo was writing the story, was that Bilbo lied essentially. He didn't want to look bad, and so he lied to everyone and said, "Oh, I won it in a game of riddles. I didn't actually steal it from this poor creature in the lowly mountains," and so it's changed. It was then written by Frodo, who obviously wasn't there for everything. At some point, he disappears and he writes the story of Legolas and Gimli and Aragorn and all sorts of other things, and then Samwise wasn't there either. So do you think we can really trust everything that was written in there, or even if you haven't read this book necessarily, just thinking about other books in general, do you think we can always trust the narrator? Is the narrator always reliable, let's say?
Yeah, what do you think, girls?
I think it's more interesting when they're biased, because you have to evaluate everything
Mm-hmm.
carefully. And, well, even if it was just a narrator that wasn't a character in the book, there would still be some bias as well, because you want to portray our protagonist in a positive light most of the time anyway. So it kind of makes more sense if he's written it anyway.
Oh, that's very true. I hadn't actually given thought to if it wasn't, if it was written by someone else, there's still going to be a little bit of bias. Actually, that's something I thought of before. What about have you read anything before where it was sort of maybe in first person, where you weren't quite sure if you could trust what they were saying?
I've read a few books. I mean, I agree with Hannah mainly. We need to really look at it. A lot of the acknowledgements which I have read in books, most of them said that they have a favorite character, which they made me biased. So, I mean, it depends. Depends on the narrator that you're reading as well, the author, I guess.
Have you read any books where you've actually liked let's say the quote unquote bad guy, that it was sort of written for you to not like them, but you ended up did like them? Did that change your perspective a little bit on how you read the story?
Yeah, a lot. Percy Jackson, just in general. That's an example.
That's a good example.
Yeah, but I mean, well, what do you think about the reliability of what Frodo and Bilbo write?
To be honest, Dan, I've never thought about it.
I always think it's an omniscient narrator.
Yeah.
Despite the fact it is by Miriam Baggins, Frodo Baggins, Bilbo Baggins, I've always thought of it as just because of the way it's the epic sweep of the narrative.
And it doesn't. I mean, it does. It significantly changes, doesn't it, the style from the party to later on. I mean, because obviously he changed. I mean, they decided, didn't they, that the audience was no longer going to be those who read The Hobbit. It would be older. It's because he's breaking new ground. There was no. I mean, that we had got fantasy, but nothing like this. No,
I think the closest thing we had to this at the time was probably Narnia. Would you say? Maybe Narnia, but Narnia only slightly precludes it. Their friendship really influenced it in both ways. Either way, but and certainly my tutor said this, and the work that we did on the text, but we never questioned the narrator's stance. Interestingly, I mean the things that he would have read as a child, Lord Dunsany, George MacDonald Fraser, Purdy, Princess and the Goblin, E. Nesbit. So you've got all that fantasy element, but of course mostly it's the sagas, the Icelandic sagas, and the Norse things that he would have been familiar with. So in a sense, they're coming out of sort of children's books, but also the blood and guts of
the heroic tradition, telling your tales in the halls of Valhalla.
Yeah.
Well, preparing for Valhalla.
I'd never really thought of questioning the narrator, really.
So I did say I was a big Tolkien nerd. This is the sort of stuff that I read online. Yeah.
You know, you said Frodo, Sam, and Bilbo are the three best characters. It's
Well,
because it's the way they wrote it.
It's very true.
And Frodo and Sam are, they have a sort of very deep friendship. Some might say something goes a bit further than friendship, and so are they making themselves look good? Is that where Unreliable is coming in? Did Sam actually single-handedly fight off Shelob? Spoilers, by the way, for those who haven't read. But maybe they've because Sam does seem to get very, very heroic in the.
He does,
the end.
towards the
really
very
heroic.
end, yeah.
It's like, where's this come from?
Yeah,
just
almost.
because of his stout heart. It's
Well,
like, yeah.
that's what he would argue, I'm sure.
I'm sure he would.
Yeah.
As the person who wrote
He based-
and then edited Frodo's narrative before as well.
He based Sam, didn't he, on people he'd met in the war?
Yeah, there's a big sort of talking point around it. I can't remember his name, but his best friend in the war, who he fought with in the Battle of Somme that I mentioned earlier. That's who they think Samwise is, and he's sort of. Tolkien, when asked, said if any character in the Lord of the Rings, he would be a Hobbit. He didn't say which Hobbit, but he said he would be a Hobbit, which that sort of
Waistcoat
rings
vibe.
true a little bit.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
relaxing, eating lots of food, reading.
Yeah.
What could be better, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Source of income unknown.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You got your end supply of pipeweed and everything, so it's okay.
Yeah. Well, I think they're all very communal, the Hobbits. It's all very much
He's got
a sharing.
Bilbo's got an arts and crafts house. Do you realise that?
An arts and crafts house.
Yeah, it's definitely a William Morris house, because that round
Oh, I
wood.
see what you mean.
Round is a bit different. I mean, I know houses with round doors, but if you look at the illustrations inside, it's definitely arts and crafts moving into Lutyens. The sort of thing you have to pay an absolute fortune for now.
Well, that's very true, yeah. And I mean, if you've seen The Hobbit, you'll remember that scene right at the end of the last movie when he finally returns home and they're doing an auction of all the items in his house because they think he's died, and they're selling, silver cutlery and oak furniture that everyone's bidding lots of money for. So as he's carrying back a chest full of gold and gold and other treasure and stuff. So they were clearly very rich people somehow.
The Shire was very, I mean, I suppose in terms of economics, it's tobacco, isn't it? From the south, farthing went everywhere. We know that. I guess you could argue that also maybe wheat, corn as well. Certain mushrooms.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you've ever seen the films, you'll remember that one scene, and it is in the book as well, where they are hiding from one of the lone riders, and they go hunting for mushrooms shortly afterwards.
Oh yes.
So yeah, big on mushrooms. Yeah, but yeah, that's an interesting point about the reliability, though, especially with you saying about my three favourite characters are technically the three authors. But yeah, so the other sort of theme that rings true in these books quite a lot, and you'll recognise it from some others, is what I'll refer to as character pairings. I think is the only way I could really describe it.
Yep.
And so you have sort of Samwise and Frodo. They're, I guess, my first two, and they are sort of your classic friendship. You need to lean on one another. They can't really do it by themselves. They rely on one another in different ways. And then you have Legolas and Gimli, who are complete polar opposites, but end up being the best of friends. So do you have any friends that you are just extremely opposite to? Yeah, we got some nods at the back. I have a couple as well, but just where for some reason, even though you're nothing alike one another, something just works. And I think Legolas and Gimli are really, really good at that. But then you also have the character pairings of sort of two very similar people that can take two very different paths. So you've got Gandalf and Saruman, both who are, not necessarily at the beginning, but both who are white wizards. And, one takes a good path and one takes an evil path, but they are two, in all sort of aspects, very, very similar people. And then you've also got Gollum, I suppose, which is probably, technically one character, right? But in two parts. I don't quite know
it's
the.
extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is the most extraordinary creation. He is, isn't he, Gollum? The fact that he talks to himself and
refers to himself in the third person.
Yeah,
schizophrenia.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
and he's well. You have Gollum, the sort of the
You've got Gollum
evil
and
half, and then
Smeagol.
Smeagol, the good half.
The
So,
good half,
do you
yeah.
remember? Do you remember Gollum in the film when he sort of talks to himself, and at one point he's kind of happy and talking, and then the next part you see him sort of get a bit angry, and he sort of changes his voice tone. So,
How Andy Serkis stayed sane, quite frankly.
yeah. Have you? I mean, slightly off topic of the books, but have you seen how he films that? How he does all the motion. So they sort of dress him up in this sort of green and blue suit that has like skin tight suit that has sort of all these like sucky points sort of all over him, and he's got this sort of head cage on that tracks the motion of his face, and he does all of the physical acting. So it's not actually CGI in terms of they've made a character and just moved him. They are using his whole body to do the movement. So where you see him sort of all hunched over and walking on his hands and his legs, that is actually Andy Serkis doing that acting, which is absolutely, yeah. I mean, for its time, The Lord of the Rings. I mean, the first one came out in the late 90s, I think. Am I right?
2001. So yeah,
Was it 2001?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
it's over 20 years old.
Yeah, but they would have started filming in the late 90s.
Yeah.
And phenomenal stuff.
Yeah.
And actually, in my opinion, I think it is the best visualization of I'm going to say a non-human character in a movie I think I've ever seen. Because it just, yeah.
It is.
Yeah, he is.
Truly exceptional.
Because they used because I think he set up a company and they used it for a production of The Tempest at the RSC that I saw with Simon Russell Beale as Prospero, and Ariel was wearing a similar suit. So we had projections on the back wall, so that he could. And because the actor was wearing this suit, you could see him diving and doing all the things that Ariel does, in a completely different way. It was extraordinary. Yeah. Yeah. Really tour de force.
Yeah, and it matches Gollum sort of description so well, and especially that sort of like, it's almost like that internal struggle of he almost wants to be really, really good but can't, and he just, everything he does is to get the One Ring back, well, spoilers, something bad happens at the end when we'll skip over that. That's a slight spoiler, I think, if you ever decide to read it.
Don't you? With Frodo.
Yeah, well, I think it's so what you may remember from the books, but there is an element of Frodo. I mean, Frodo has the ring for what, something like 30-something years, I think.
Yes,
because he spends. There's a big time gap in
tweets,
between.
isn't he,
when he inherits it.
When he inherits it.
Yeah. And there's a big time gap in between him getting it, and so in the movies, if you watch them, Gandalf goes off to research and comes back in about 6 months, but in actual fact took like 18 years, I think. So there's a big time jump in the movies, but he has the ring for a very long time, and at first it's in an envelope, just sort of in his house, so it doesn't sort of have much as an effect on him. So the way that, for Samira, for your benefit, if you haven't seen the movies, the way that the One Ring works is that sort of the more you're around it, the more impact it has on you. So you've read Harry Potter, surely? Yeah. So kind of like the way that the Horcruxes work. It's a similar thing. The more you're around them, the more sort of the evil you feel of it, and the more it tries to take control of you. And in every example of a man ever having held the ring, he folds immediately, or pretty much. He just instantly falls to the power of the ring. The hobbits much less so. They take a little bit more work, I suppose. But the longer he goes on carrying the ring, the sort of the heavier it gets, the burden of holding it. But also the closer he gets to Mount Doom, which is where he needs to destroy the ring, the more powerful the ring becomes. And there comes a point where he's held on to the ring for so long that he can't get rid of it anymore. He spent so long thinking about destroying it, and then he's literally hovering over the volcano like this, and then he can't do it. and he ends up trying to run away. In the end, the ring does get destroyed. I don't think that's a spoiler. I'm sure everyone knows that.
Yeah.
But how
It
it gets
destroyed.
destroyed
It's not the way
is an
you-
interesting.
It is.
Yeah,
It is.
it's not done in the way you think it might do.
Can I say, you talk about how men struggle with it more, and you talk about pairings as well. I was just thinking of Boromir and Faramir. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a long time since I read it, but doesn't Faramir, when he first sees the ring, he goes, "Oh, I wouldn't, if I saw this on the road, I wouldn't pick it up," or something like that.
Yeah.
Something along those lines.
And
yeah.
Boromir, on the other hand, is consumed by it as towards the end of Fellowship of the Ring,
Yes, because he sees it as the
notoriously.
weapon that Minas Tirith needs.
Exactly,
Yes.
Gondor's redemption, so to speak. So, yeah, just any thoughts on that? Because, it's just because how come Faramir is Sam also immune to it? I'm not sure. I can't quite remember, but yeah. I just thought it was interesting that Faramir just is like so, not dismissive exactly, but it doesn't seem to impact him somehow.
Well, you tell me. You say what you think, Dan, because I think there's a link between Faramir and Sam, but
Okay.
Oh, okay. Then I'm not sure what you're going to say with that. But yeah, I mean, Boromir is... so for the benefit of the three of you, Boromir and Faramir are brothers, and their father is the steward of Gondor. So there hasn't been a king of Gondor for a long time, and he is sort of the caretaker of the throne, I think, is the closest you can get to it. And Boromir, being the oldest, is sort of the, you're going to carry on the family line, and you're going to do right by the family, and you'll be the next steward. And so I think he has more of a reason to panic, or a reason to take more desperational steps, whereas Faramir is a bit more, oh, my father doesn't love me anyway, it
He's
doesn't
out of
matter
favour.
what I do.
He's hiding in the
And
woods.
so I think it comes down to a little bit of what the person could do with it, because the ring is supposed to have not a conscience, but the ring is supposed to kind of think for itself a little bit and can kind of work on its own. And so I think there could be an element of, this person is useful to me, and
I
to
think
getting
there
me
is-
back
I think
to
there is that element, yes,
Just want to say in the film before we hear from Miss Huntley, in the films they changed that. Faramir
Yes, they
is
changed
he
it.
is quite, he sees it as a chance
Yeah.
for
yeah.
get back in my dad's good books,
Yes, yeah,
which
they
of
do
course,
change
so,
that.
yeah.
Mm.
But anyway, yeah. So what's your theory then?
I think it's because Faramir is not he is a warrior, but I don't think he's a natural warrior. He does it because his father, Denethor distinctly says, doesn't he, your love of me has been stolen by Gandalf. I can't remember the precise words, but that's essentially what he says. Trying to remember if this is in the book or is this in the film? Anyway, and Gandalf spends a long time in Minas Tirith researching and looking for evidence about Isildur and what the ring is. I mean, he really probably suspected, but and I think that Faramir is influenced by Gandalf, but not in the way that of wanting magic. And the link with Sam is that Sam is a gardener. That's essentially his job, and that's what he sees himself as. That's what he knows. He knows things will be utterly changed, but essentially he goes back, and that's why Galadriel gives him that gift. Galadriel gives him a gift of a box of earth and a seed, and the seed becomes a Malon tree, which is the Lothlorien trees, which are, I suppose, in their autumn, but the one that's planted and flourishes in Latin because hobbits are long-lived, survives. So, and that's what Faramir decides that after the war, that's what he and who does he marry?
Oh, Eowyn. Eowyn.
Yes, are going to do. That they'll go and revitalise the Minas Ithil, and build a garden. And I think that's it's a very English thing.
It is a very English
Yeah.
thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. especially at that time as well.
Yeah, especially.
Yeah,
at that
especially
time.
maybe less so for the three of you. I'm not sure, but certainly at that time. Yeah. But there certainly is an element of, this person is easy to corrupt or is a warrior or something along those lines. So, but at some point, everyone succumbs to the ring.
Yes.
As exemplified by Frodo, even though he carried it for a long time and sort of resisted the urge, but harder and harder. So, yeah.
It becomes. I mean, it's the most extraordinary description, isn't it, of a hideous burden that he's carrying. The wheel of fire in his head. And, it's just. Yeah.
And of course, with character pairings as well, I've just realised we didn't mention Merry and Pippin.
Of course, yes.
Yes.
Merry and Pippin are what can only be described as the comedic two, I think. They do play a very important role in the story.
They are extraordinary characters, aren't they?
Yeah.
And the actors they chose to play
Cast
them
perfectly.
just wonderful.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And my favourite part of the book, actually, with Merry and Pippin is in the Two Towers when they befriend the tree Ents. And the Ents, I actually even think the chapter could be called Ents Go to War, or something along those lines. And these big tree Ents go to battle against Saruman, and they sort of fight all the orcs and things that are there. And they do show it in the movie as well, where at the end everything is sort of covered in water, and lots of things are burnt down, and some of the
Lots
tree
of
Ents have died, and all sorts.
as they call themselves.
Yeah, and they are sat on top of a ruin, having a feast, smoking pipeweed, and just having a really good time in the middle of something really terrible, and they just don't care. And they are the two friends that are. I'm sure everyone knows the two friends that are just not trouble, but they sort of just seem to find trouble everywhere they go. And sort of if something bad happens or if something goes missing, they're the ones that you just sort of automatically blame. Yeah. But I mean, what other character pairings am I possibly missing from The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings? I mean, I suppose there's a lot in The Hobbit with two very similar dwarves as part of their party, I suppose. But in The Lord of the Rings, which is maybe a bit more common, are there any standout ones that I might have missed?
Don't spring to mind. You can have the contrast between Denethor and the King of Rohan. What's his name? Played by Bernard Hill.
I was going to Bernard Hill, obviously.
Yeah, we're both doing a.
Oh no, my
it's
blood
not
with the names.
Eomer because that's Eowyn's.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Theoden.
Theoden.
Yeah, so
Theoden
you
King.
you got Theoden King of Denethor, and I suppose then you could put Aragorn's love interest, because sorry to say that women aren't as prominently featured, but you do have the love triangle of Arwen and Eowyn as well. Even got similar sounding names.
Yes.
So I suppose instead of pairing, it's the contrasts.
Yeah,
so
that's very true.
So
I mean, certainly if it had been written now, if he was writing it now, Arwen would not be just waiting at home.
No,
well, and again they changed that in the movie. She's a little bit more active,
Yes.
at least in the first movie.
Yeah.
Because she replaces Glorfindel, doesn't she?
Yes. Who's just a
I was trying
senior
to
elf.
think there is an equivalent to Glorfindel. But there isn't really. I mean, you've got Elrond and Galadriel.
Yes,
I suppose
true,
really
the
there's
two.
a triumvirate, isn't there? There's Elrond, Galadriel, and Gandalf, really. But in terms of the elves, it's because of course Gandalf is not an elf. Elrond is half elven. Yeah, Galadriel's interesting, isn't she? Because she's married to somebody who is lesser than her, who's essentially the prince consort rather than he. I mean, he is called king, but and you wonder, well, what was it that he decided that Elrond would not have a spouse? She's long gone. Yeah. Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned I suppose a good point. That I suppose maybe given to the time that it was written, women are not hugely present in those, but they are much more in some of the others. Though some of the others I've got here are less of a story and more of an academic work, I would say, because he only ever wrote The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings as stories. The rest was all just sort of history of sort of the languages and the world and things. And so, but there are a bit more prominence in there, but they are much harder to read. And so, unless you read The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and you go, wow, this is the best book I've ever read in my life, then maybe the others aren't quite your sort of what you want to read. However, you were mentioning earlier the poem that you had in your English exam, and in the ones on the end there, these are sort of collections of stories and poems and things that Tolkien wrote, as well as sort of his stories. And Tom Bombadil especially, there's lots of really, I mean, I personally haven't read them, but I know of some of them, or I've read sort of snippets of things, but there's lots of sort of nicer poems in there, and sort of things that are much more light-hearted that you can read sort of on and off and just take a couple of stories here and there. But if you decide you really love The Lord of the Rings, there is so much stuff that you can read into. I mean, he dedicated his almost his entire life to writing The Lord of the Rings, even at a point that he didn't know, because when he was just creating languages and writing the history. And then his grandson Christopher Tolkien basically spent his entire life also working on all of this. And actually, without Christopher Tolkien, we wouldn't have almost. I mean, The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings is what, 20% of what we have, maybe
in the way that it is, nor the Tolkien academic studies now either. I mean, he's Chris is a really interesting character. Very much so.
There's but as I said, I'm a Tolkien nerd, so I belong to lots of Tolkien online forum boards and things. And it is quite often said that without Christopher Tolkien, we probably wouldn't have Lord of the Rings movies. We probably wouldn't have as many people reading them, or as many people talking about them. And he is, I mean, obviously Tolkien read them, so or rather wrote them. So he is the sort of the master behind it. But without Christopher, we probably wouldn't be sat here talking today, at least anyway. So, and it wouldn't be sort of as big as it is. So. Us Tolkien nerds owe a lot to Christopher.
We do, yeah.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, sadly now no longer with us, but
no. Yeah. But I think there's another book coming out, or has just come out very recently, or I think not quite like this. I think it's more of an academic. I think Christopher had started it, but I think it's a sort of an academic.
Like an Encyclopedia of Ardor or something like that.
Yeah, so I don't know. I haven't looked into it too much, but it's definitely some kind of academic piece and sort of working on some of his other things, and they're releasing, just to go even more nerd for you, they're releasing things like, books that are just entirely his fan mail and him responding to fan mail, which is how we know some things now, because he wrote back to people and said, "Oh, this is how it worked," and
isn't it?
And in the 50s and 60s, that was how you asked an author a question. You didn't tweet them or email them. You wrote them a letter and you asked them a question, and he kept a lot of that, and a lot of that's been published as well. So
the archive is extraordinary.
The original archive's kept in the US somewhere. I can't remember where. A very famous library somewhere, whose name I now can't remember. But
I can't say I know.
No.
I managed to look that one up. Library Congress.
I mean, my tutor John, he spends part of his time in the US because his family's there, but also when he's in Oxford for the courses, there's a lot of work still he does at the Radcliffe and the Bodleian. Bodleian mostly, but so what I think is interesting is that in terms of pairings is Beren Luthien, because that's who Tolkien saw himself and his wife as.
Isn't that what's written on their gravestones?
What's on their gravestone, You've been there?
I haven't. No.
It's lovely.
No.
It's a really lovely churchyard and graveyard, and my niece read them, and I'd read them, but she said, "Oh, let's go," and so we did. Partly because my mother had spent some time in Oxford doing a course, and when Catherine was a, sort of the age that she was reading them, so we went. It's a peaceful place. Lovely.
Yeah, it's something I haven't quite figured out exactly how I want to do it yet. But there being such a big Tolkien nerd, gravestone, tattoo, something I don't know. But I've always really loved the quote, which is Aragorn to the four hobbits, Sam, Frodo, Merry, and Pippin. My friends, you bow to no one. Yeah. That is something I absolutely love, and it's just one of the the hobbits. The hobbits are very small, right? So they are the size of children. They are described as in several cases, but they were sort of the backbone of the story, and the sort of the little people can defeat the big people,
genius.
And good overcoming evil and things, and so they are the four heroes of the story. Even though you've got Legolas and Gimli and Gandalf and all the others who do a lot of work, it's almost sort of expected that they could do that, whereas the hobbits were more of a no one thought that they could do it, and it's sort of the good overpowering evil thing. So I quite like that.
Well, it's the ordinary people, isn't it, coming from the ordinary shires that are eventually going to defeat evil, and that's to some extent the myth of we've got the Second World War, and to some extent I suppose the First World War too.
Yeah.
But
it was ordinary people, and in a lot of cases children. I don't know how often you've talked about this in history class, if you've got there yet, but especially in World War One, there were lots of 13, 14-year-olds lying about their age and, thinking it was a heroic thing going off to war. And so, maybe, children a little bit older than you, going off to war and sort of, them being the heroes. So that's partly where some of that's probably come from as well. So.
So do you think you're interested enough to go and read The Hobbit now, Karis? Yeah?
Well, you read The Hobbit, did you? Oh, no, you watched The Hobbit.
You watched The Hobbit.
Watched The Hobbit.
I really want to read it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It. We have The Hobbit.
We have The Hobbit, and we have Lord of the Rings when you're ready.
Lord of the Rings, yeah.
So.
It is and because it was written as a children's book, or more of sort of an early teens book rather than children's book, I think. It's got quite a nice sort of flow to reading it. It's very, it's what's the genre of? Is it teen fiction? Is that the
YA?
Is that YA, young adult? That's it. It's sort of getting towards YA, I think, but yeah.
But it's very accessible, and yet it's very pacey, accessible.
Oh yeah, there's so much
very
happens.
Fast moving.
Yeah. There's never a dull moment.
Yeah.
No.
Whereas Lord of the Rings is not quite as fast moving.
No.
Yeah, Bilbo is he's young when he goes. I mean, I know that he's older than than he would be, but he's not grown up.
No, he's still quite young.
Because they live so long, and so he's still quite naive, and you've got that sense of innocent abroad, who does make a real difference. It's, and in the films, of course, he's the moral heart of the story.
And of course, trolls, goblins, dragons. What more could you want, right?
Right, Dan. Then anything? Do you want to wrap it up?
I don't know. I guess I'll just wrap it up by saying I hope you read it.
Yeah.
It is obviously my favourite book or favourite series, and I think the more people read them, the better. There's lots of sort of mini life lessons in there, I think, but also it is just a really fun read, and
a wonderful ending.
And a really wonderful ending. Yeah. Quite sad ending actually.
Actually, yeah.
Ending.
Yeah.
I when I was doing my gardening lectures, did I finish with Sam? I think I might well have done. No, I didn't, but I certainly quoted it because he comes back to the family, the house, the Rosie and the children, and well, I'm back. And it's ordinary life again.
Yeah, you do get the really happy ending, and then you sort of get the very sad ending afterwards.
Yeah,
So sort of, there's almost two endings in a way.
Yes.
Well, it depends on the reviews of the films. There are so many endings, nobody can choose one.
Yeah, but that is like the books. You know,
Yes.
there is. You know, you could end the books at several points, and so there's But I quite like the sad ending. It's quite fitting, I think. So
Yeah.
I won't spoil
A
it.
little
You'll have to
aftermath.
read it.
And the other thing to say is it's a great story, but it's also very, very influential because we know how popular fantasy is these days, right? We've mentioned Harry Potter, but there's all the other things that are coming out. The shelves are littered with them. Kind of all starts here, really. This is the source of the fantasy avalanche in the YA world we're enjoying right now.
Yeah,
So,
and lots of stuff like Harry Potter is heavily influenced. So I mentioned the Horcruxes. It's basically the One Ring in a way, sort of. You know, but there's lots of influence from it. So
absolutely. So there you go.
Yeah. Thank you very
All right.
much.
Yeah, thank you very much,
you.
Mr. Stone. Thank you.
Really interesting.
Thank you.
Talk about it.
All right. So next week we're going to have some Year 7s leading us. So we look forward to that. But until then, should we wave goodbye to the camera? Bye. Bye. Bye.